Allô, Nissan? Hey, grosse tempête, hein?
Hey, Karine, oui, je sais, les vilains bonhommes de neige sont de retour.
Mais avec le Nissan Rogue à traction intégrale, c'est pas stressant.
Exact, il est conçu et testé pour nos hivers. Oh, Karine, il y a un bonhomme dans le Rogue.
Ah, c'est correct. J'ai allumé les sièges chauffants.
Ah, bien joué, Karine. Maîtrisez toutes les conditions. Louez le Rogue S 2026 à partir de 0,4% jusqu'à 36 mois, incluant une réduction fidélité de 0,5% pour les clients Nissan admissibles. Jusqu'au 2 mars, sur approbation de crédit, les conditions s'appliquent. Détails chez Nissan.
We're going to talk about taxing our sweet tooths in just a moment, but first things first, we got some breaking news happening right now, and it is the ruckus in the National Assembly. Today was the day, by the way, where the PQ said we're going to show up, we're going to try and take our seats in the National Assembly, but they have not done the oath to King Charles III, which you have to do, and every other elected MNA in this province has done it, even if they don't necessarily agree with it. But the PQ said, no, we're not going to do it. And, you know, we were expecting some fireworks, and lo and behold, you know, I think the PQ got what they want, some pretty striking images, and the Sergeant of Arms of the National Assembly, and you see the constable, and he is in his police gear, and he's standing in front of the door, and Paul St. Pierre Plamondon tries to enter the National Assembly, and the Sergeant at Arms says, no way, no how. It's kind of electric to see what's happening at the National Assembly. Now that brouhaha outside the doors, that's ended because Paul St. Pierre Plamondon has been told where to go. Him and his two other MNAs, get out of here. We're not letting you seat. And then inside the National Assembly, Nathalie Roy, who is the new Speaker of the National Assembly, cast down her ruling, and she basically said, well, I agree with what the previous Speaker had said, what François Paradis had said. If you don't swear an oath to King Charles, you can't get in. And if you want that rule changed, well, the National Assembly needs to get together and pass a law and vote on it, and then you could change things that way. But until then, the members of the PQ can't sit. So the fireworks that we were expecting did actually happen, and the PQ, those three MNAs of the Parti Québécois, are not in the National Assembly right now, being held outside by the Sergeant at Arms. Very interesting political stuff this morning. Okay, let's turn our attention now to taxing sugary drinks. Maybe the only way to reduce their consumption, and it's something that we here in Quebec have been mulling over for a while. A sugar tax is nothing new, however. It's been in the U.S. in various jurisdictions since 2010. In France, they've seen a reduction of 15% in the consumption of fizzy drinks since 2012, when a tax was first put in place there. With more on this, let's go to Antoine Genest-Grégoire, a PhD candidate at Carleton University and co-author of some research on the subject. Hi, Antoine. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
So, do I say sugar is just like tobacco and we got to deal with it as such when it comes to taxation? Well, what say you?
Well, I'm not a public health expert. I wouldn't say the damage those substances can cause is equivalent, but there's certainly health risk associated with the consumption of both. So, though in some ways, you can apply the same methods to try to control the consumption of those substances. I don't think we're gonna, get the sugar companies on trial the same way we've done with the tobacco companies, but there's certainly a parallel, at least in the way the industry is structured and tries to protect its market.
And I think, if to make a case for me that we should impose a new tax or a new type of tax, you'd also have to make the case that it would work. So what does your research show? Do these taxes in other jurisdictions where they've been imposed, do they work?
Well, as far as the economics of it go, yes, they do work. We've had plenty of experience from France, as you mentioned, plenty of jurisdictions. And essentially, if you summarize the effect that you see in all of those places, if you raise taxes on sodas by 10%, you can expect a drop in their consumption of about 10%. So it falls like that. It's a fairly round number. So you do see a difference. And then you can modulate how much, depending on how high you go with your tax, you're going to see higher reductions in the consumption of those drinks. Then you have the question of what people consume instead of those drinks. If the price makes them choose something else. Obviously, the something else that they choose needs to be less sweet. Otherwise, you're not going to get the effect. We do see that in other jurisdictions, but we don't yet know exactly what the precise impact on, for instance, diabetes and heart disease. That's way further down the line. That part we don't know exactly yet.
You know, and I hear what you're saying. You know, a tax at a certain level can bring down the consumption by 10%, let's say. You know, if you tax higher, would it bring down the consumption even further? Or is there a certain point where the consumer doesn't matter? Make it double the cost, I'm still going to buy it.
Well, I mean, I don't think any jurisdiction made a tax that doubled the price of those drinks. So up to a point, we don't know. But you know, there are differences between jurisdiction, and what we see, it's fairly linear. So if you put a 50% tax, you're probably going to see something close to a 50% reduction. If you put a 200% tax, I mean, no one has done it. Maybe the effect tapers out at some point, but we do see effects even if the tax is fairly high. It does reduce consumption, and the reason for that is that, for instance, tobacco creates a dependency. Sodas do not create the same kind of dependency. There are many alternatives. One of the obvious ones is just plain water, which is obviously not the same with any food product. So in that case, you see fairly strong effects because there are other options. People respond to price because there are other things in the aisles in the grocery store, and also because they have access to just plain tap water at home.
When it comes to taxing sugary drinks or sugary things, should the focus just be on beverages, or do we have to also look at just sugar in diets in general?
Well, we kind of started from the point of view that we started from the work that the Institut National de Santé Publique has done, and there's a specific focus on sugary drinks because they're really like an add-on to our diet. We really don't need to consume any drinks with sugar added. It's really not necessary for our health. So that's why there's a focus on that. There's also lots of research on that. When you go to different products or to specific products, then you're more hurt by definitions. Changes in patterns are not the same across different countries. But, you know, Coca-Cola is pretty much the same in any country. So that's why we can aggregate the data we have from all of those places and say that's what a soda tax would do. But obviously there are other foods and drinks that have negative impacts on health. But sodas is the focus right now because we know a lot more about it and because it's a fairly narrow class of products. So we have better evidence on its impact on health and then better evidence on what we could do with a tax, for instance.
So, and let's talk about that impact on health here, because, you know, if you have a 10% tax, reduces consumption by 10%, can you tell us what are the other benefits down the road, maybe that we're not thinking of? Because, okay, sure, it reduces consumption, but have we seen how it can impact the health of a society in general? Do we see further down the road that, you know, diabetes rates go down or maybe heart conditions go down? Any other indications that there's a benefit health-wise on a society years after the passing of a tax like this?
We don't have the data post-implementation of those taxes, but we do have the data in the other direction. So we know that more consumption of sodas and sugary drinks is associated with weight gain, with type 2 diabetes, and with heart disease. In some cases, it's also associated with more cavities. So if we know that consuming more of those products leads to those outcomes, it makes sense that if we reduce consumption of those products, we should expect the opposite effect and see benefits in those areas as well. But we don't yet have that data for most of the sugary drink taxes that were put in place because it's fairly young policy. It's a fairly new idea.
Antoine, just to wrap up here, if you were to consult with the Quebec government on imposing such a tax, what would your recommendation be?
The main recommendation is to make it visible. Those taxes work when people see that the prices have changed, when people see that the prices of some goods are now much higher than the prices of other goods. So that's how people react. That's how people change in their consumption patterns. So they should aim for maximum visibility so that people understand that those prices are less advantageous than they used to be, and also because those prices send a signal. We don't tax those products for nothing. We tax those products because we think they're going to be health benefits. So that would be the main target if we were to implement such a tax in Quebec.
Antoine, thanks so much for your time this morning. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Antoine Genest-Grégoire is a PhD candidate at Carleton University.